anyone hearing me? But yes, we are here. And anyone who's here gets to see the start of a new design set.
Of course, my microphone was muted. Oh, yeah. That sounds like I'm in an echo chamber. Well, this was unwanted. At least I'm not getting feedback, I'm just getting echo. I promise I'm not speaking in a cave. I guess this will be the next thing I try to work on. Da-da. Oh, wait. You were hearing me through the cat cam microphone. Oopsie. Oh, yeah. Okay, maybe it sounds better now. Nope, still echoing. Oh, married. The only thing you can be echoing off of would be my monitor. So I guess I'll have to learn how to do filters. Because noise suppression is on. Uh, I honestly don't remember what the different audio settings do. Because I know this wouldn't have to do anything with gain. Because my gain is loud enough that you're hearing me properly, it's just giving you echo. I Don't know why I'd be getting the tin can, though. I can't tell if I'm hearing the background noise or not, because it should be off. Okay, it sounded fine that time. Oh well, if we have sound, it is a good thing. Let's go to the study, where there is also a minor upgrade. Admittedly, you can't tell the minor upgrade because I hit it to make sure my fireplace isn't showing ads. Okay, it says fireplace, 10 hours, 10K, no ads. So here we are. And tonight, we're doing more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. Wait a minute. I wonder if it's actually my headset settings. If, there was anyone here, I'd ask how the audio sounded on your end. But since no one's here, actually I have my viewer count turned off, so I don't know if anyone's here or not. Let's see, is this going to be single author individual story this time? Yes, it is. As opposed to last week when it was 2 stories by the same author, this week it will be 2 stories by 2 different authors. Possibly 3, depending on how the stories go. Since we've got 51 minutes before the ads try to kick on. Oh, this one has a subtitle too. Cool. Our first story for this Gaslight Mysteries Thursday. No official name. Actually, it's like beyond the 221B, but still. 777 City. A Tale of the Telephone by Julius Chambers. I went to my telephone exactly at 11 o'clock on the night of December 30th last winter to call up with my editor of the paper. My house was on the west side of Regent's Park, and the wire ran to the city telephone exchange. Apparently, my line was switched into connection with the Fleet Street exchange, but the delay followed. I was familiar with the peculiar hum caused by the induction of the wires, but that night the sounds were an unusual character. The operator at the city office had given me an unused wire. As I awaited the answering signal to indicate that the desired connection had been made, I heard 2 people talking in loud whispers to me, unintelligible. Then I heard a door swinging on a squeaky hinge and hastily closed with a muffled sound. A cupboard door. Then silence. One of the people had entered the cupboard and closed the door. Then a knock unanswered. Immediately I followed a crash at the other end of the wire, and I heard the breaking in of a door. "John!" exclaimed a woman. "Ah, my lady, I have caught you at last," were the words of the intruder as he strode into the apartment, slamming the broken door against the wall behind. There was a metallic tone in the voice that made me chilly when he added, "Where is this scoundrel?" "I don't understand," were the frightened words of the woman. "Well, I do. He's in that cupboard." I heard the door squeak again, and the man in the cupboard step out. "At your service, sir," said a strange voice in a low with a shiver in it. "I knew it, woman!" fairly screamed the head of the family. "Don't be a brute," said the calm, low voice. "I'm here. Settle with me." "You dog!" hissed the first speaker as he sprang for the offender, overturning a table covered with bric-a-brac, and a mortal combat began. In a momentary lull, I could distinguish the breathing of two infuriated combatants, and I heard the rustle of a woman's dress as she swept across the floor, an opening and closing of a door. The unfaithful creature had abandoned her lover, not a sob nor an entreaty of mercy. I was sure of the facts and understood the situation as if I'd been in that apartment. The contest was resumed, and crash after crash of broken furniture attested to its savage character. Who were these men, and where? Unquestionably in a house where the telephone had been left open or an interruption had occurred during its use. Had the receiver been hung up, the communication with the room of the mystery would have been severed. The wire leading thereto was crossed with the one given to me to use. The struggle was to the death. I could hear the breathing of the contestants as they lay on the floor, but neither man asked quarter. The door reopened, and to a woman's sobs were added the appeals of forgiveness. One of the two men had overpowered the other, which was the victor. A pistol shot, sharp and crisp. Then the stillness of death. It was death. The hush could be felt over the unknown length of wire connecting me to the murder chamber as I ear witness to the crime. Whispers broke the silence. A window was raised. Now shall I hear the cry of murder? No. Somebody looked into the street, presumably to ascertain if the pistol shot had been heard by passing pedestrians. That indicated the home to be a populous neighborhood, although the open window did not emit sounds of passing vehicles. Then the window was slowly closed. Next, I heard the strike of a match. Merciful heavens, this deadly conflict had taken place in the dark? The lover had been killed, but would the lighted match reveal to the husband the face of the stranger, or of a well-known friend? What would be done with the body? "Are you through?" asked the telephone clerk at the City Exchange. "No. Mark that wire with which I have connected. It doesn't go to Fleet Street, but I must know where it runs. Mark it as you value a £5 note. I'll be at your office as soon as I can get there." "All right," was the prompt reply. The clerk at the City Exchange tied a ribbon around the plug that carried the end of the wire leading me to the unknown house. I related the entire incident and appealed to his curiosity and avarice. As I was destined, he inadvertently had switched me open to an abandoned line. It had been put up for a special occasion and cut out thereafter. It was a lost wire and did not lead to the Fleet Street Exchange, or anywhere else. After making tests, the clerk reported that the communication with the house of the crime no longer existed, but as an explanation he pointed to a thermometer outside the window. "Make a memorandum of that temperature," he said. "What's the use?" "You understand how you got into that house on the lost wire?" "No." "At a certain degree of cold, that house line contracted sufficiently to cut in on a dead wire and thus connect us, for a brief space, with the chamber of the murder, wherever that may be." "We must be careful to have this correct," I said. Now, comprehending the operator's meaning, what does the temperature register? "Exactly 0." The body of a young physician of social prominence, Henry Clay Stanage, brother of Dr. Oscar Stanage, so prominently identified with the Jasper case, was found on the side of the path at Hyde Park the next morning. He had died from a pistol shot in the right temple, and near the corpse was a weapon with one chamber discharged. Evidence in support of the theory of suicide was so strong that a verdict of effect by the coroner's jury disposed the case in the public mind. I saw the body and found finger marks on the throat and a rent in the back of the dress coat. The young gallant had died at the hand of my murderer. The Stanage bore the reputation of a gay boy. All attempts to establish the whereabouts of the physician on the previous night came to naught. Part 2. The only clue I possessed was an abandoned wire. I engaged a telephone man to find the house of the crime, hoping thereby to bring the murderer to justice and, incidentally, to secure a piece of sensational and exclusive news for my journal. The lineman was zealous and overconfident, but at the end of 2 weeks he had lost the wire near Elephant and Castle. He believed the house we sought to be in Brixton. He sneered at all suggestions from the telephone operator. "An ear trumpet chap can't tell me how to work," said he contemptuously. "I didn't learn my trade that way." Another wire expert was hired, and I told him the story. Perhaps I had not been sufficiently frank with the first man. The new telegraphist adopted the suggestion of the exchange operator and said, "An accidental crossing of wires caused by contraction admitted you to that room and enabled you to hear the murder done. We only have to wait, Mr. North, until the thermometer registers 0, then ring up the dead wire from the city exchange and ask, 'What number is that?' You will have landed your game." That seemed to be simple, but the winter was unusually mild. Although I retained the man in my pay for a month, there wasn't a moment in which the thermometer touched 0. We kept ceaseless vigil, one relieving the other at the city telephone office during enforced absence of sleep and meals. I took a room in a boarding house near the exchange that I might be easily within call. Nothing must thwart this case. One night the weather moderated, and I deemed it safe to go to Kensington to pay a call I had owed for a long time. While I was away, the temperature fell so rapidly that it was within 1 degree of the desired point. The clerk at the exchange hurried a messenger to the address I had left with him. In the warm house of my friend, the condition of the weather had been forgotten, but on the street that night was bitterly cold. Possibly the hour had come. At the first chemist's, I saw a thermometer outside the door. Jupiter! The mercury was exactly at 0. A cab carried me to the city telephone exchange in half an hour. I stepped inside and connected. The dead wire rang. No answer. Glancing through the window glass at the thermometer outside, I saw that the weather had slightly moderated. The reading thereon was 2 degrees above 0. There it hovered for an hour. Then the mercury slowly descended into the bulb. Now it stood at 1.5 degrees. 10 minutes later, the record was less than a degree above. I rang vigorously but did not hear any sound at the other end. In my anxiety, I forgot the thermometer. When I looked again, the mercury had moved up 0.5 degree. Another wait succeeded, and I had almost decided to give up the vigil for the night when the bell connected with the dead wire rang. Snatching up the receiver, I asked, my voice almost tremulous, "Well, what number do you want?" "Who are you?" was the rejoinder. "This is the exchange. What number do you want?" Kensington," was the curious query, after a moment's hesitation. "Yes, what is your number?" I asked, in hopes of obtaining from the unguarded answer the information I had been so anxiously seeking. "Ah, you want to know what number this is?" I recognized the voice. I was talking to the murderer. My murderer, as I had often mentally designated him, to distinguish him from everybody else's murderer, of course. And wasn't he mine? Only one other living person knew him beside me, the woman who had witnessed the killing and had remained silent as a price of forgiveness. "What is your number?" I asked again. "Find out," was the reply. Then I heard the phone hang up. It seemed to me that I had not learned anything new. I was deeply chagrined for a moment, but taking stock of my knowledge, I had acquired much valuable information. First, I confirmed the theory that the house I sought had to be reached by a wire that hung in close proximity to the abandoned line. Second, the short house wiring hung over, not under, the long copper wire, because the contraction of the copper wires of which the house connections were made was slight. Third, the man and the house I sought were in Kensington, not Brixton, as the first expert had concluded. And fourth, my murderer was usually home at night. Fifth, his telephonic connection was made through the Kensington exchange. Sixth, the man I believed guilty was on his guard and was very suspicious of my inquiries. He would probably be wary of my telephone in the future. On the other hand, he would not dare to have it removed at this time. The dead wire was my only clue. My next step was to go to the office of the telephone company and secure an appointment as a receiver in the Kensington exchange. I was inconspicuous, and I donned the remarkable headgear and receivers wear. The wear and worry of the work nearly crazed me for the first day. The steel band that encircled my temples completely disorganized my brain. A month passed, and I was no nearer the solution. Despair was overcoming me, when a new suggestion of the greatest importance was made to me. "Has Moxley tested the wires as usual?" asked one of the operators during the day. "Not this week," replied the exchange superintendent. All customers were frequently called up by an expert to ascertain that the wires are in good order. If I could become Moxley's assistant, I reflected, I might be able to hear my murderer's voice again. I secured the place and made my appearance at the Kensington Telephone Exchange as Moxley's helper, not a position calculated to turn the head of any man. I was delighted and believed success assured. My duties were to carry a galvanometer and rheostat, but I divided the supposed wages with Moxley. He consented that I should test the wires. I was a bachelor, he assumed, and I could live on little money. Besides, he liked to encourage enthusiasm in young men. Moxley guaranteed to make me an expert in 3 years. "Judge Riley is the best lineman in England," said he, "and Riley began with me as a helper." Only one operator was in the office when we arrived, because the telephone is not in much demand before 10 o'clock. I tested the private lines, of which there were several hundred, and sought in vain for the voice. 63 customers failed to answer when I called, and I marked these torpid wires, hoping that one I wanted was among them. Having completed the test of the private wires, I began making connections with the pay stations throughout the district. A curious thing occurred. I rang up a station in Camden Hill. I heard the receiver taken off the hook, but no reply came in answer to my summons. I called again and yet again. No reply. Warm as was the day, I felt no chill in my spinal marrow. I heard the door unlocked, and an instant later the squeaking of a hinge. The wire led into a cupboard. Again I asked for a response. Finally, the phone at the other end, wherever it might be, was replaced on the hook, and silence. Part 3. I left the building, called a cab, and drove to the address of the number I had rung up. It proved to be a chemist's shop near Holland Park. Showing my credentials, I demanded to know why the inspection call had not been answered. The chemist was civil and explained that he had observed the previous summer that on hot days the communication with the exchange was interrupted at times. He stoutly maintained that the bell had not sounded. I tried it and called up the Kensington Exchange without difficulty. The druggist was in no wise nonplussed. He merely pointed towards the street and said, as he waited to turn on the customer, "You forget that it is raining. The weather is colder." True, there had been a heavy shower while I was in the cab, but so intent was I in pursuit of my only object in my life that I hardly observed it. I understood the chemist's meaning. The case of the first wire had attempted to be run down. The bit of metal, I saw it doubtless, passed over the abandoned line. By the same reasoning, the wire that had been again led me to this modern Francesca's chamber by another route was strung under the one that entered the chemist's shop. Zero weather contracts the metal in one case. Summer heat lengthens the line on another. Contact was made at two different places. The coefficient to this last problem was unknown to me. The druggist had not noticed the thermometer just prior to the shower because he took the temperature only at 9, 12, and 3 o'clock. I remember the telephone standard at the top of the London Life Assurance Building Company, where Sergeant Dunn had machinery that automatically recorded every change in the weather on an impeccable tally sheet. That officer received me courteously. I asked the exact thermetrical reading just before the heavy rainfall. Consulting the cleverly devised instruments, he replied, "Exactly at 90 degrees Fahrenheit." The degree of summer contract with the lost wire had been established, but that was all. I must go on. Had I located the section of the city where the criminal lived? I feared not. This wasn't a crime of the slums, but the use of a telephone did not necessarily indicate respectability. Why not start as a chemist and run down the wire from that point? The end of the rainbow never seems very far away. I sent for Moxley and told him that I wanted to ascertain. He looked knowing, said the task would be easy, and he'd take a day off to do it. Although he gave a month to do the task, he did not find the house and the woman or the man. But he was full of explanations and showed how, wholly by accident and not by design, the people on the other end of the wire were absolutely safe if they did not make a break themselves. The days drifted along into September. The warm weather was gone, and I could hope not that the 90-degree weather would recur. It was equally impossible to restrain my curiosity until midwinter. I engaged a room in a boarding house adjoining the Kensington telephone station. The cables came along thereto underground and were carried up the side of the house in a covered box to the roof, where the strands were separated and hung upon a rack, from which they were conducted to the operating room below. The discovery that the wires were brought into the station by underground complicated matters seriously. What was strung aloft at some point of length, but where did it leave the subway, and how could I recognize it when it was found? Hey, Redstone. How you doing? I now did what I ought to have done long before, and secured the services of George Riley, the most expert trouble man in the country. When the whole subject was laid before him, he pronounced unequivocally in favor of starting at the city office and run down the wire. A long chase was more likely of success than a short one. Riley went to work with zest. With his experienced eye, he had no difficulty in following the abandoned wire along Holborn, thence down to New Oxford Street, where, without apparent reason, it switched off to the roofs, which it followed to Victoria when it returned to the underground. By the end of the third day, Riley was in full cry through Lambeth and into Kensington, down as far as Pearl Street. At Brixton Station, it made a long jump over the top of a tall building, over the railway bridge to another building. Riley believed that he was close upon a solution to the mystery. Out on Brixton Road, atop a telephone pole, emerged the bright copper wire. It crossed closely above the line it was following. His practiced eye told Riley that the two wires were liable to have a contact by the contraction of the long wire. The stretch previously mentioned was more than 1,000 feet in length, and at zero temperature the contraction would be fully 2/3 of an inch. Nothing could have been easier than to tie the two wires together and to bring up the house of the crime. But Riley thought that course was unwise. My murderer, as I still called him, was on his guard. Having kept the secret for 8 months, he knew exactly what he was about. I was waiting at the City Exchange for a following day when Riley called me over the public line and asked me to ring up the dead wire. I did so, and someone exclaimed, "Is that you, John? When will you return? Better come at once." It was a woman's voice, that of the woman who had begged for mercy. Standing back from the transmitter, I asked, "Where?" "To the bzzz." The connect was broken. I called up Riley and told him to tie the two wires together, and he did so, but I could not get my lady's ear again. I asked Riley what he thought. In his opinion, the woman lived in Brixton, and the wire ran in that direction. Riley accounted later in the day in a change of mind. The copper wire was a private one, running from a city office to a private house in Brixton. He had traced it to an office building in Cheapside. The wire did not go to Brixton, as he had supposed, although it ran in that direction a good way. Telephone wires are often pieced together, he explained, and the lineman will sometimes make appropriate an old wire to make it through a long detour. The members of the firm in whose office the line ended were easily discovered. Riley slung a coil of wire over his shoulder the next day and entered the office. We asked for the telephone and were shown into a private room of the firm, Gasper, Todd, and Markham. At his desk sat John Perry Gasper, solicitor, aged 57. Riley was not a student of men. He could not read character as he could a Morse instrument, but the wire was what he wanted, and now that he had found one end of it, nothing appeared easier than to secure the other. After having made 2 or 3 pretend tests on the machine, he went away. The instant he reached the landing outside his office, his manner changed. He sprang down the stairs into the bank in the ground, where he asked the city directory. There was the residence of John Perry Gasper was given, Cheapside and Kensington. Oh. How long does that usually take? Damn. That's a long wait. Madly triumphant, Riley hurried to my address and rushed breathlessly into my room. In a few words, he revealed his success. I was as jubilant as he. We hurried to Kensington to look at the house. We almost ran. No difficulty was experienced in finding the building. It was a corner house of splendid proportions, and the name Gasper shone audaciously upon the doorplate. While my thoughts were busy as to my next action, Riley's were occupied with a different text. He had surveyed the building from all possible points, and in a thoroughly appreciative way, but when he came back from a hasty walk down the side street, he was pale and trembling. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Matter? Well, I'm knocked out." "I don't understand," was my reply. "Can't you see that there isn't a telephone wire entering that house?" "What wire is that?" he asked, in dismay, pointing upwards. "Oh, That's the district messenger call. Notice it runs from pole opposite the stable and is the cheapest iron. There isn't any telephone at the house. See, a reference to the telephone catalog, which we ought to have made earlier, shows that. No, ours not that bad then. The more he was mystified, the clearer became the solution to me. It was a case of another woman, another family. Nevertheless, the other end of the wire at the house of the murderer was either very far away as ever. One thing I could establish at once, and I would make the rest. Strange that I had allowed the moment to elapse when I had learned Gasper's connection with the case. I went to the nearest call office and called up Gasper Todd Markham, Cheapside, and asked to speak to Mr. Gasper. I hadn't thought what I should say when a voice answered, "I'm Mr. Gasper. What do you want?" I only had sense enough to reply, "When did you take the telephone out of your house?" "Never had any in it," was the curate's retort. After waiting a moment, he added savagely, "And I don't want any." This was the voice. Gasper's name was John. Riley went back to Gasper's office to see the telephone. Gasper was not there, and the expert examined it more carefully. He discovered that the wires that led through the back of the little box, in which the phone thence into a large wardrobe. This was locked, but a moment's exclamation showed that the two wires left that concealed clothes press. They went out at different windows, but they came from the same switch, a switch inside the wardrobe, by which a private wire could be cut in or cut out. The line over which I had called the office obviously had been a different one from that leading to the mysterious room where the shooting occurred. This was really a discovery. I speak of it as a discovery, although it was, as yet, merely an assumption. But Riley was sure that the switch existed in that cupboard as if he had seen it. As he told me his story, I remembered that the office had not responded when the wires were tied together. The bell hadn't rung because a private wire had been switched out. One bold stroke, I thought, and we shall have the story. My next step was startling. I had been admitted to the bar years before. I called upon a prominent KC friend of mine and secured letters of introduction to John Perry Gasper, and finally wrote asking if I might call with uncertainty of a private interview. He named the following afternoon. I presented my letters. One of them was from the chief of police. I watched the lawyer's face and a big tremor across as he broke the seal of the big blue envelope bearing the arms of the department. I waited for an inquiry from him as to my business, but he was stolid, immobile as marble. His dull gray eyes appeared slowly in drawing themselves inside his skull. The eyelids gradually closed in a particular squint. Riley was waiting in the hall, and I knew the moment had come. Now for audacity. "Will you let me have an expert examine the cupboard immediately behind your telephone?" "There's no cupboard behind it," was the quick retort. "Yes, there is, right behind the door against which the phone box sits." My voice trembled, and I was very pale, but my nerves did not fail me. Gasper took up the letters one by one and read through them more carefully than before, and then muttered, "Go to the deuce." "Not until I find the other end of the private wire leaving from the next room," I retorted. "If you refuse, I shall return with a search warrant and thoroughly turn over the entire place. The warrant will be based on the charge that you are defrauding the telephone company, but that will not be the real accusation. Your arrest, which will follow, will mean what? That you are charged with the murder of Harry Stanage, who was found dead in Hyde Park last winter with a bullet in his head, and your pistol by his side." I was sure of a sensation, but it came in an unexpected way. "That's your game, is it?" the voice ringing with exultation. "If ever a man deserved to die, that scoundrel did." It was my turn to be surprised into speechlessness. "Look here," exclaimed Gasper, rising to his full height behind the desk. You're after blood, but man to man, I stake my life I convince any judge or jury that the rascal died at the right time. Denounce his murderer, arrest him, and indict him, hang him. If you can, I shall defend him with my last extremity, and every technicality known to the law. But you know the murderer. As to who killed Standage, Gasper fairly screamed, that is for you to find out. My Casey friend assures me that the case is not complete because evidence heard over telephone is not admissible by a court of law. Gasper knows that as well as the public prosecutor. Therefore, I alone, of all living men, know how Henry Standage died. Ouch! That story has a weird point to it. Telephone was still fairly new, and someone who left their phone off the hook and a crossed wire led to someone hearing the entire event of a murder. Okay. Look around. I think I may go ahead and go to ads briefly. So I can go ahead and get those out of the way because these stories have been running a little long lately. And I don't want to have an ad break in the middle of a story. So I will be back in a bit. Oh well. Cats are unpredictable at best. So I'm not surprised there weren't any on the cat cam. But welcome back from the ads. See, okay, we've got... Oh, this one's a hell of a lot easier to read. Okay. The next story for the night, by an author that we've had read before. Make sure I don't have... Okay. No, I don't have the cat cam on this one. Okay. I know crowd control wasn't active. I'm not playing a game. For our second story for this evening, A Clever Capture by Guy Clifford. Turning over the pages of one of my old diaries, I came across notes here and there about many curious riddles. Some worked out and ticked off as solved, others still awaiting the fullness of time when all shall be known. Amongst the former, perhaps one of the most curious of them all, the manner of its solution, is that which I have chosen as the title of this remarkable story. My friend and partner, Robert Graceman, has been almost invisible for several days, shut up in his den engaging in some recondite chemical experiment, appearing only at occasional intervals to restore exhausted nature with a hasty meal. His usually rebuctant and jovial face bore evident signs of his continuous and laborious researches. His eyes were heavy and leaden-looking with want of sleep, and his whole demeanor showed most painfully the enormous strain of overwork that he was imposing on his system. That evening at dinner, I took him to task severely on the foolishness of continuing his work without proper relaxation. "All right, Holden, old fellow," he said. "A few more hours and then I will promise to take a holiday. Your anxiety, however, is quite unnecessary, for I'm as right as trivet, except that I feel a bit fagged. Tomorrow, however, I will lie in bed all day and catch up on my back sleep." So, with a nod and a smile, he left me to return to his crucibles and evil-smelling chemical mixtures. Next morning, his place and the breakfast table was empty, and looking into his den, I was glad to see his apparatus put aside, as though done for the present. Evidently, the experiments he was engaged on were completed, for the present at any rate, so cautioning our old housekeeper not to disturb him, I descended to the offices to get through my morning's work. On going upstairs to lunch, I found the Graceman perched on the back of a chair, skimming the Daily Post. "Hello, Busy Bee," he exclaimed, throwing down the paper. "I've taken your advice, you see, and kept my promise. Now I'm going to dose you with your own physic. We will take a holiday together, turn up business and chemistry, and have a good time." "I can't leave my office at present," I commenced when he broke in. "Well, then you'll have to take the office with you, then. For go you do, my boy, so there's no use in wasting time in discussing the point. The question is, where shall we go, and what shall we do?" "I may as well give in," I replied, with more appearance of reluctance than I really felt, for his joyous mood was very infectious, and a few days off would do us both some good. I thought you wouldn't resist the temptation. Shall it be Brighton? Nah, too crowded. A few days up the river and sunning? Say, wouldn't be half bad if the weather holds, and it looks like keeping up." So it was decided on the following morning we should pack our bags and depart for Sonning on Thames, one of the sweetest little spots of our lovely river. We were like the couple of schoolboys that evening, for it was seldom of late years that we had made holiday together, and it was a matter of some difficulty to unearth our boat's flannels, and so long as they remained unused. Graceman, who was a fisherman of more than ordinary zeal, spent hours in furbishing up his rods and tackle. However, at last all was ready and everything packed up. We determined to start early, and before 9 o'clock we were on our way to Paddington. Sonning is an out-of-the-way little village, having no station of its own, so it is usually reached by driving from Twyford. As our train drew into the Maidenhead station, just this side of Twyford, Graceman, who was gazing out the window, suddenly called out, "Why, there's Lyman! I wonder what he's doing down here." And jumping up, he thrust his head out the window and waved his hand. Lyman, or Inspector Lyman, of Scotland Yard, to give him a proper title, was somewhat a favourite of Graceman's. In a few seconds he was at our door and shaking hands. "You're playing truant, Lyman," said Graceman. "Mr. Holton and I are here on a jaunt for a few days. What's the matter with you, man? You look hyped." "I am hyped, sir, and pretty badly, too," returned the inspector. "You no doubt saw the papers yesterday that there had been a burglary at Lord Lipton's house down here the night before, and her ladyship's jewels stolen except those that she had on. The usual thing, you know, dinner time, entrance gained by a ladder into the lordship's bedroom. No trace about, no one there, no clue, no nothing." Wound up the inspector laconically. "It's an aggravating thing," he went on. "Is it the one of 5 or 6 burglaries that have occurred during the last 6 weeks or so that we can find no clue? First they were down in Surrey at Woking, then Sevenoaks, Bickley, Harpenden, and Esher, all visited, and now they're here. We feel as sure the same hand at all these places, for the work is so clean and not a slightest trace left behind on any of us to help us." "Poor fellow," said Graceman. "It's too bad of them to play you up such games. We're off now. Come and see us next week at the office, and if you don't catch them, we'll put our heads together. Goodbye." And so saying, Graceman resumed his seat on the train as it moved on. Our holiday was nothing to do with the adventure, so I will pass over the pleasant days we passed at the bosom of old Father Times, and come to our last night at Sonning. It was Sunday, and we intended on returning to London by an early train on Monday morning. We were sitting on the lawn of the White Hart Hotel, smoking a final pipe before turning into bed, when Graceman remarked, "I haven't seen any account of the capture of Maidenhead burglars in the papers this week. Have you?" "I had forgotten there were such things as burglars," I replied. "I scarcely look at the post which you so thoughtfully ordered." "Ah, what a humbug you are, Holton," he languidly answered. "When I proposed this little trip, you couldn't leave the office. But since you've been down here, I don't believe you thought once of all your multitudinous business obligations. My professional opinion is at the heart, you're a loafer. A perfect loafer. Come on, let's start in." When we arrived at Paddington next morning, Graceman rather surprised me by saying he wanted to send a wire to Inspector Lehman. So making our way around the telegraph office, he dispatched the following message to that gentleman. "Come and see me tonight at Fig Buildings, if you have not found your Maidenhead friends. Graceman." As we bowled along in a hansom, I endeavored delicately to pump him on the subject of burglaries in general, and Lehman's in particular, but he failed to respond to my insinuating inquiries, and recognizing my want of success, at last assented. Business matters have an awkward way of accumulating during one's holidays, and I was kept busily employed for the rest of the day. I was reminded during the afternoon of Inspector Lehman's, however, by receiving a telegram saying he would call after dinner. I sent the message upstairs to Graceman, but the clerk said he was not at home. Graceman had returned, however, when I went to the dining room for dinner. "You've had Lehman's wire?" I said interrogatively. Yes, and I see he is still down at Maidenhead. He didn't say so in his message, I remarked. No, of course not. The telegram was dispatched from Maidenhead, if you'd noticed. Therefore, I think it's a fair inference that the man is also there, but we shall presently know what success he has had. Meantime, have you an engagement for Wednesday evening? As I have a little adventure to propose which I think you would like to share. I had nothing special on hand signified my witness to participate, and from past experience I refrained from trying to elicit what adventure was until he prepared to enlighten me. When dinner was over, we adjourned to the smoking room, where very shortly afterwards Inspector Layman was announced. "How is Maidenhead looking, Layman?" said Graceman, with a twinkle in his eye as he shook the inspector's hand. "You're getting quite sunburnt." "I was about to make the same remark to you," returned Layman. "Both you and Mr. Holton are looking rather fit. As to Maidenhead, it's a jolly enough place if you're down there boating and nothing to worry you. But from a professional point of view, I'm just about tired of it." "Then you've made little progress?" "No, we're just where we were when I saw you at the station. In fact, we're worse off, as there's been a week's loss of time with absolutely nothing to show for it. We overhauled several suspicious customers and during the first day or two after the burglary, but they were not our men. Personally, I don't hope to trace them, as I feel convinced they are well out of the neighborhood. Their mode of work shows me that they are too clever to be caught unless we are able to drop them red-handed. I cannot even form a definite theory as to who the thieves may be or how they work. You've helped me unravel some tough cases, Mr. Graceman, but then you've always had some clue or trace to work on, but now I'm beaten." "Never say die," said Graceman, as the inspector finished speaking. "You forget the Delford mystery and the McHill bill case, to say nothing of one or two others where we had as little to guide us, and yet you pulled them off all right." "You pulled them off, you should have said," returned Layman, "for if you had not put me on the right scent, they would have remained mysteries for the present day. But I fear not even you can pull these chestnuts out of the fire for us." "Now you want to nettle me, Layman. You know my weak side and take advantage of it," replied Graceman with a smile. "However, I will humor you and accept your challenge, but mind you our usual understanding. My name, I say our names, for Mr. Holton will help me, are not to appear under any circumstances whatsoever." "Of course, I shall be charmed to go burglar catching, but I don't quite see—" I began, when Graceman stopped me with, "Wait a bit, Walton. Layman, I want your assurance." "If you wish, of course, I promise, sir. But let me tell you frankly, I would much sooner be allowed me to inform my chief, for I don't much care for false credit, and praise so gained rather rankles me," said Layman, stroking his clenched fist on the table. "I must say as I say," returned Graceman. "We cannot be known for the matter. You and I have worked together many times, and you have previously tried to overcome my desire for remaining incognito without success. You must accept the stipulation. And now to business. From information received, as the newspaper reporters have hit, I understand the burglary is to be attempted in Sunbury next Wednesday evening. My information, unfortunately, does not give me the address of the victims, nor does it state the numerical strength of the burglars, but I put the number at about 3. A very important fact, however, is that the Confederates meet at Sunbury Railway Station at 6:30 on Wednesday evening, and they are finished speaking on Wednesday evening, and those are the same gentlemen you are looking for at Maidenhead." As Graceman finished speaking, he leaned back in his seat and surveyed the inspector, who sat bolt upright in his chair, his face vividly expressing the astonishment he felt at the explicit and detailed exposure of the enemy's plans. "Well, this beats Mayflick and Cook. Why, if I did not know you so well, I would believe you were making a fool of me," exclaimed Layman. "Here have I been in close communication with all our force, half over England, for more than a week on this job, while you returned this morning from your holiday and in a few hours put your hands on the entire band. Yes, it's funny, awfully funny," he wound up as I burst into laughter at the comical expression the inspector wore. Excuse me, Layman, it's too bad to laugh at your perplexity, I said. However, I am as much in the dark as you are. Can you inform us, Mr. Graceman, the source of your remarkable intelligence? Began Layman. I thought I told you, from information received. Is that all? All that I can tell you at the present, but I should like to ask you how you intend to act in the matter. Or perhaps you prefer to hear my ideas first and say what you think that means by them. By all means, replied Layman. Alton, Graceman commenced, please give me your attention, for you are as well acquainted over the ground which we are about to travel as I am. And turning towards Inspector Layman, he continued. Sunbury, as you are probably aware, is a small riverside village a couple of miles or so above Hampton Court. The station lies about a mile from the river, and the best part of Sunbury is situated close to the Thames. Along the road from the station, the village also has several large detached houses, and I may mention here that the road is exceedingly badly lighted at night time. I may say that near the station of the opposite side of the line are a number of houses, in fact, another village, but these are small cottages, and I don't think we need trouble to worry about them. You made the remark when we met at Maidenhead that there have been 5 or 6 burglaries, all very similar in character, during the past few weeks around London that have been occurring during the same time as the family were at dinner. Was this in such a case? There was only one exception, if exception it may be termed, replied Layman. In the case of the thieves are presumed to have entered after dinner, as during dessert the lady of the house sent one of the servants up to her bedroom for her vinaigrette, and the girl noticed something unusual in the room, but they must have been just at hand, for within an hour the robbery was discovered by the lady's maid when she went to tidy up her mistress's room. For all practical purposes, we may therefore say each of these robberies was effected during dinner. Then let us assume that the plans of our friends at Sunbury are laid on the same lines. What I propose is this, that tomorrow you go down to Sunbury with the same 2 or 3 good men, and thoroughly investigate the neighborhood. Find out which of the inhabitants is in the near vicinity who may be considered worth these fellows' attentions. Ascertain if there are any strangers recently arrived in any hotels, or if anyone giving a dance or dinner party on Wednesday evening. You will have but little difficulty in your inquiries, as it is only a one-horse place, and everyone knows everybody's business. You can leave your men down there if you like, but they must be careful to avoid being conspicuous. They should dress like boating men, flannel shirts and serge suits, go for a row or day to blind suspicion. By this means you will gain a good knowledge of the locality, and if you will call here tomorrow evening, we will make plans for Wednesday. If you get back in time, come straight on here and have dinner with us. As Graceman concluded, he rose and stretched himself by slowly walking up and down the room, while Layman, after asking a few questions about Sunbury, and promising he would come see us again the next evening, lighted up a fresh cigar which I offered him, and took his departure. It's not asking too much, Graceman, I remarked when the inspector had gone. I should rather like to have 1 or 2 little points cleared up on this affair. Say on, my friend. Firstly, then, at what time on Wednesday do you require the pleasure of my company? And secondly, where are we, that is, you and I, going to? And thirdly, where are we going, and when do we get there? Concisely put, and with commendable moderation, said Graceman, and I will reply as tersely. Firstly, 3 p.m. Secondly, Hampton Court. Thirdly, 4 row. Having gratified your curiosity, I must bid you good night, for I still feel the effects of the balmy air of sunning, and I am confoundedly sleepy. Whether this was an excuse to avoid further question or not, I cannot say, but I rather think it was, for my friend Robert's custom was rather to sit up till the small hours of the morning. Graceman, after breakfast next morning, informed our housekeeper that We should probably have a visitor for dinner that evening, and a little later on he joined me in the office, where, somewhat to my surprise, he remained the rest of the day. I think he rarely did, as I think I've mentioned before. Inspector Lehman, however, did not arrive in time for dinner, and it was past 10 o'clock when he reappeared. His report of the day's proceedings in Sunsbury may be summed up very shortly. As arranged, he made inquiries and suggested the previous night and thoroughly surveyed the neighborhood. The most important facts he had gleaned were that there were two houses that would have parties on Wednesday evening, and that as far as could be learnt, there were no persons staying in the village whose movements were at all suspicious. These two houses were both on the road from Sunbury to Hampton, not more than 5 minutes apart. The chief result attained, remarked Graceman, is that your knowledge of the ground will be an immense advantage to us when we have to work at night. You, of course, particularly observed the situation of the houses which were giving the entertainments. Lehman signified his assent to the question with a nod. Briefly, then, went on Graceman, my proposal is this. You take down 3 more good men tomorrow afternoon and have them just outside the station at 6:15. It will be almost dark at that hour. How many men have you there now? 3. Good. Then instruct 2 of them to proceed, and when it gets dark, to watch these houses, and the 3rd man must patrol between the 2. If nothing transpires, they're to return to Sainsbury Station at 11 o'clock. But if the burglaries arrive at the house, the man must get quietly away and summon the 2 confreres, and secure the thieves as best he can. Mr. Halton and I myself are going down to Hampton Court tomorrow afternoon. We shall row up to Sunbury, and we'll meet you at the Magpie Hotel. We shall be there before 6 o'clock, and we will immediately proceed to the railway station, where I hope to spot our friends when they meet. I think that provides everything. Graceman wound up interrogatively. That's all right if we can recognize the scamps, replied Lehman, or if they attack the houses we have under surveillance, but I don't see where we shall come in if we miss them at the station and they break into some other place. That's certainly a weak part in our chain, returned Graceman, but I will show you how we can strengthen it when we meet the Magpie. For the method of our work, however, I think you will find 1 or more of these burglars are past masters at the trade, and I shall be more than surprised, Lehman, if you don't find one of them to be an old acquaintance, in which case you will recognize 1 or more of them yourself. I need hardly suggest that all your men and yourself should be disguised, and as we do not wish the birds to take flight just when we are about to snare them. Discussing various details of the morrow's campaign, it was nearly midnight when the inspector left us. Grossman and I went down early the following afternoon to Hampton Court, where we hired a light skiff from the boatyard we usually patronized, and informed the man that we should leave the boat at Sunbury that night, and he could send and fetch it back the next day. The distance by river to Sunbury is just about 3 miles. Graceman suggested that pulling easily, we could arrive at our destination about 5 o'clock, and have some tea before Lehman joins us. I must not linger over the scenery of the river, which at that season of the year, for it was end of September, was full of ripe beauty, which always held me with a special charm, and the reach below Sunbury I consider one of the most beautiful in all the Thames. For myself, I thought it all too soon when we reached the landing stage of the Magpie Hotel, and the adventurous enterprise on which we were engaged was forcibly thrust upon me by Graceman's remark to hurry up, or I wouldn't get any tea. However, had we arranged matters so well that we finished our meal comfortably and lighted our pipes before the inspector arrived punctually at the stroke of 6. Dusk was fast deepening into the gloom of night as we started for the station, and as soon as we were out of the main street of the village, Lehman reported that everything was in order as arranged. Good, remarked Graceman. And now I will tell you how I mean to make the weak link of our chain right. But first I must look in here. And as he spoke, he opened the gate of a tiny cottage, and walking up the short path, knocked on the door, which was opened almost instantly. Ready, Tom? We heard the gentleman say. That you, Mr. Graceman. Right you are, sir. and the door shut, and two men came towards us. I remembered that this was the abode of Tom West, a professional fisherman who had many a time and oft been engaged a day's fishing by Graceman. In a few words, Graceman told him that as we continued our walk we were down there for, and then addressing Layman and myself, remarked that Tom knew every man, woman, and child in Sunbury, whether villagers or gentlefolk that he had written to at 6 o'clock that evening when he called. "You'll see presently at this distance will be the utmost servants," said Graceman, and then he continued his remarks, which the addition of our party had interrupted. "You have no doubt noticed the exit from Sunbury Station is through a wooden gate at which the porter stands to collect tickets. Remember at that time my information gave the meeting place of Sunbury at 6:30. A coincidence, or shall I call it corollary, is the fact that the train arrives here at town 20 minutes past 6. What more probable, then, is the train brings one or perhaps more than the thieves. Now, Tom West, who can tell us who are natives and who are not, and if there are any strangers on the platform awaiting the train's arrival, we must watch them. If, however, there are no suspicious characters about, then we must look for them amongst the passengers of the train. You must place your men, Layman, outside the gate where they will be talking together obscured in the gloom. They must watch you, and who will indicate to them with a nod of any fellow or persons Tom West does not know, in which he will point out to me, and I will nod to you to the suspected party passes the gate. Your men, after shadowing the suspect, must report to you at the Magpie, where Mr. Halton and myself will adjourn as soon as you are engaged to the track. Here we are at the station, and the train signal too. Look sharp, Inspector. Arrange your men. We will go to the platform." As we passed on the platform, Graceman commenced to chat rather loudly with Tom West on the day's chance of sports and morrow amongst the barbel. There was apparently no one there besides ourselves, but still laughing and chatting, he kept the conversations from flagging for an instant, until the roar of his quickly approaching train drowned his retorts. Then he said sharply, "Tom, keep your eye on each person that approaches the exit. If you don't know them, give me a poke in my arm with your stick. Now look sharp and keep chattering and laughing all at the same time." There were very few passengers in the train, perhaps a score in all, and several had already passed through the gate when Tom West whispered, "That fellow in the brown hat gaping around near the gate's a stranger to me." As I glanced at the man out of the corner of my eye, I saw a look of recognition flash from him, and in a moment another man joined him. "There's another stranger talking with him," whispered West again. Both men now gazed at the quickly thinning group of passengers, when I noticed one touch the other on the arm, and both moved towards the gate. "Now, Halton," said Graceman rapidly, in a low voice, "you walk off the gate as if you were going out, and when I call out Jim, count 5, then answer back yes, and return to us." Closely following Graceman's instructions, a few steps brought me amongst the last of the people pushing through the gate. The two men I had been watching just passed the exit when Graceman called out Jim. Waiting to count 5 before I replied, another voice outside the gate answered, "Hello?" At the same time, I shouted yes. Naturally surprised, I looked towards the spot where the third whence came. I saw two men who had been watching, together with a third man. I walked together towards the spot where Graceman stood. They were just through the gate in front of me, and I could have not touched them by putting out my hand. Fortunately, I didn't forget Graceman's instructions, and turning sharp around, I called, "Well, what is it?" As I did, I heard one of the three give a guffaw and say, "I thought it was you, Jim. The bloke wanted..." This little scene took far less time to act than it was to set down here, and half a minute would have been more than covered the time occupied. When I got close to Graceman, he burst out in a hearty laugh that might have been heard at the end of the road, and Tom West joined him. But what they saw to laugh at beat me. However, they seemed so tickled that I felt compelled to help them, so we laughed each together. "Capital! Couldn't have been better," said Graceman, when he had finished taking an exhibition of himself. "Well, I'm glad of that, anyhow," I replied. "All right, old man, keep your hair on. What kind of chap was Jim?" "Tall, darkish beard, mustache, rough, dark gray overcoat, brownish soft cloth hat, and he had a largest black handbag. I answered somewhat proudly, for I have a woman's knack of taking stock of people at a glance. My dear Houghton, you're a credit to me. Let us away. Come on, Tom. Don't forget we're fishermen only now. So saying, we sauntered away from the station into the darkness of night. We had barely gone 30 or 40 yards before a figure advanced from the gloom of the hedge to the roadside. It's all right, sir, said the figure, for it was layman. My 3 men are shadowing them. We know one of the scamps, the one in the brown hat, so there's not the slightest doubt you've given up the straight-up tip this time. I must be off now after my men. Are you going to the Magpie? Yes. Then I'll come home there directly we've located them. And the inspector was briskly off ahead of us. Nothing more was said as we returned to the hotel. Tom, West, and Graceman went deep into the merits of trolling and spinning for Jack, and the subtle niceties of snap-tackle fishing for the same interesting fish. Come in, Tom, and have a whiskey, said Graceman when we arrived at our destination. When we were seated in a comfortable corner of the smoking room, Graceman said, Would you like to be in at the death, or shall we wait the final act here, Houghton? I should rather like to see the capture, I replied. That is, if it's in the neighborhood. All right, we will decide when Layman returns. It was nearly an hour before the inspector appeared. He was beaming as sprightly as a 2-year-old. Declining my invitation to have a whiskey, he drew up a chair at our little table and detailed his movements since he left us. The presumed burglars had walked leisurely down the road we had just come without any sign of uneasiness. They continued through the village and came easy indifference until they were close to the house where the dinner party was in progress. There they loitered for a bit, as if to see if the coast was clear. Then they disappeared over the wall and shut off the side grounds from the road. One of the detectives followed them and returned in a few minutes to say they were ensconced in the summer house at the bottom of the garden. The other 2 detectives had then got over the wall and hidden themselves in the shrubs near the house, whilst the first went back to watch the summer house. When do you start, Layman? Asked Graceman when the inspector had finished. As soon as you like, sir. The dinner party is for 8 o'clock, and it's nearly that now, so we ought to be moving. Come on, then. Let's be off, Houghton, if you're coming. Yes, I've come so far, I might as well see the finish, I remarked. You must be careful, gentlemen, said Layman. For one man I know is a dangerous customer. Is Mr. West going to join us, too? I should like to be uncommonly, if I shan't be in the way, eagerly remarked Tom. All right, said Graceman. You'll stick close to me. Now we're ready. And so saying, we moved off to our expedition. The night had closed in pitch dark, and a heavy mantle of black rain clouds obscured the heavens, and the wind was beginning to blow with some force. The road beyond the village was dark and lonesome. Some little distance before we arrived at our destination, the inspector bade us to halt, while he went in to see if all was quiet. Returning in about 10 minutes, he reported all serene, and under his guidance we went forward and clambered over the wall. He hid us away near the 2 detectives, and desired us to remain perfectly quiet unless he called us by name. The house was a wide, 2-storied building with a veranda over the ground floor. Every room downstairs was blazed with light, but only the top rooms, only 2 rooms, showed a full light, whilst in the others there was only a dim twinkle, as though gas burners were turned down low. We were barely hidden away when we heard 8 o'clock strike for some neighboring church. Scarcely breathing, the minutes passed like hours, but it could be scarcely have been 8:15 when I saw 3 shadowy forms approaching from the opposite corner of the house. They halted close to where I was crouching with Tom West, and to one side and Graceman on the other. "Keep a sharp lookout, Bill," I heard one whisper, and then the same man said, "Give me a hoist." Clutching hold of one of the pillars that supported the veranda, and the other stooped for him to put his feet on his shoulder. Then, slowly rising, the climber grasped the edge of the veranda and drew himself up. A second man followed in the same manner, and when he was up, the other whispered down, "Now the bag." And the fellow picked up the black bag and, groping about, presently said in a hoarse whisper, "All right." When I saw the bag slowly ascend, it had evidently been tied to a piece of cord which was too dark to discern. From our hiding place, I could see the two men crawl from one of the darkened windows. Then, in a couple of minutes, I heard a faint click, and presently the window was slowly raised, and both men disappeared inside the house. I was quivering with excitement now and breathlessly waiting for the next act of the drama. I had not long to wait. The man watching below stood back a little from the house where he could command every window. Just behind him was a patch of shrubs, and as I watched him, a dark object crept noiselessly around the bushes, then straightened itself up. Two arms shot out and clutched the watcher by the throat and threw him back into the grass. A dull thud was the only sound that reached me as the body fell. Then another figure joined the first, and a few others of the fallen men was drawn out of my sight by the bushes. Another figure then appeared and took up the position the captured man had occupied, whilst three other forms crept under the veranda, just where the burglars had climbed up. 10 minutes or so slowly dragged by. Then the figure appeared at the open window and crawled quietly out, followed by his pal. When they got to the edge of the veranda, one whispered, "Here you are, Bill," and I suppose Bill stepped forward and secured the bag. Both of the men on the roof then lowered themselves over the edge and dropped right into the arms of those that were waiting hidden beneath the veranda. There was a bit of a scuffle, and the rest of us rushed up, but the capture was complete without our aid, and without a word having been spoken. When the handcuffs were on, one of the twain said in a bitter tone, "Bill was preached, I suppose, Jim?" "Yes, damn him," replied the other. "Oh, no, he hasn't," remarked Layman. "We've got him trussed like a fowl in the grass there. We've had our eyes on you since Maidenhead affair." "Yes, we've done it once too often," admitted the fellow. "But let us see what you've got in the bag here," said Layman as he spoke, and moved closer towards the window, and let a light shine into the open bag, turning the contents over with his hand. "Ah," he ejaculated, "by Jove, but you made a grand haul. We'd better go round to the front door and let them know what's been happening." We all marched to the side yard to the front, and the prisoners guarded by each of the two stalwart detectives. "Let's get in the background. We don't want to be recognized," said Graceman to me as the inspector had knocked at the main entrance. The servant started back in alarm on beholding a band of men on the porch, but a few words from Layman assured him somewhat, and closing the door, he went to fetch his master. "By Jove, that's old Colonel Stanley," whispered Graceman in his ear. A tall, white-haired man threw the door open widely. "Well, friends, what's the matter?" "Nothing very serious," replied Layman. "Your house has been broken into while you were dining, but we secured the thieves in the act and have all the plunder here," tapping the bag. "Good gracious! Are you a police officer?" said the colonel. Layman nodded, and the colonel asked him to go in. "We may as well toddle," remarked Graceman, taking my arm. "Tell the inspector, Tom, and Mr. Halton that I had gone back to the Magpie." It was not long before the inspector joined us, and when I suggested whiskey this time, he did not refuse. "By Jove, Matsu! Welcome in." He still retained the black bag. "I've sent the men up to the railway station," he said, in answer to Graceman's inquiry, "and if you don't object, we might catch the next train back to town, as I shall feel more comfortable when these jokers are safe under lock and key." On our journey to Waterloo, Layman related that what had passed when he entered the house of the colonel's invitation. The old man called his son out from the dining room, and Layman related the affair of the capture, and it was agreed that nothing should be said to the guests till after dinner was finished. Then the story was to be told, and all the people in the house were to make a list out of what story was to be told, and things they had missed. The lists were to be sent to the inspector at Scotland Yard. Layman also was to catalogue the contents of the black bag and send the list to the colonel, who was to attend the police court in the following morning, when no doubt the magistrate would order the things to be handed over to him. When the inspector had finished relating the arrangements, he turned to Graceman and begged him to relate how he discovered the plans of the burglars, which he had forecasted so exactly. Graceman unbuttoned his overcoat, and taking his pocketbook, handed Layman a little slip with a newspaper cutting. "Have you seen that before?" he asked. "No," the inspector replied in a hesitating manner. Then suddenly, his remembrance seemed to strike him. "Yes, I have, though, by Jove. Didn't it appear in the morning papers a few days ago?" "Quite so, in the Daily Post agony column," replied Graceman. "But what's that got to do with the affair?" "That's my information received, that's all," said Graceman quietly. "Do you mean that this is all you had to work on?" quickly demanded Layman. "Yes." "Well, but I won't swear. Please explain and settle me." "Don't worry, there's a good fellow," replied Graceman as he handed me the cutting, which was as follows: OWSNEHDNANBLEUFSRPD YASSYTTIXIXT Then he continued, "This appeared in the Daily Post agony column last Monday, and I read it and solved it was returning to Sonning. Then I wired you to come to see me. Similar notices had appeared in the same paper at different times during the past 2 or 3 months, but you put the clue in the hands at Maidenhead." "Me? How so?" "When you were informed me that similar burglaries had occurred at Woking, Sevenoaks, and other places. Now, all these little cryptograms have an attraction for me, and I've taken the trouble to decipher them. The answer to this one is found by reading every third letter in rotation thus." And so saying, he handed us a slip of paper on which was penciled the following: O13, W26, S1, N14, E27, U2, H15, D28, N3, A16, N29, B4, L17, E30, U5, F18, S31, R6, P19, D12, Y7, A20, A20, A33, S8, S21, Y34, T9, T22, N35, A10, S23, E36, T11, I24, X37, I12, X25, T38. Jim. If you start at the number 1 and read the figures in numerical order in the translation, it comes out Sunbury Station, 6:30 Wednesday next. Jim. Those that appeared in the previous week solved themselves by the same rule, but each read differently, the difference being in the place and time of the meeting. I looked up the file of the papers and found out that each date of the burglary took place in the neighborhood given, but in 2 cases the name appended to the cryptogram was Bloater. The others were all Jim. I concluded that it was a practice of these rascals that when they spotted a suitable crib to crack, they communicate the facts to each other by this means. I think you'll admit my conclusions are justified themselves, and by our joint efforts we have outwitted the enemy." "Joint efforts is good, remarkably good," Layman said, with a half-hearted kind of laugh. "A pretty tale to pitch to my chief. How did you manage it, Layman? He will say. Joint efforts by the man unknown, I answer. Make him smile, won't it?" "Pooh! You can put your chief right better than that," replied Graceman. "Say anything or nothing, but mum's the word in regards to Mr. Halton and myself. And now, good night to you." And shaking hands with Layman as the train drew into Waterloo, we left him to look after the safe custody of his charges. It may well be in conclusion to relate that at the trial it was proved fully that the prisoners had concerned all of the burglars mentioned in this narrative, and the sentence was 10 years penal servitude, the judge commencing Inspector Lehman for the smart way in which he handled discovering the captives. There are definitely things that the written word work better than spoken. Especially, like, I would want to show the drawings of, like, the dancing men from Sherlock Holmes. And this one, I read out what the code was. So the burglars literally just told him where they were going to go. Let's see, what time is it? It's only 10:31. Both of the stories tonight took at least 40 minutes to read. Let's see. Will I be able to get the third one done? The next story would be shorter than that one, but I'm still not sure if I'd be able to get it done before 11. But after the next story, there's 3 from Arthur Conan Doyle. Tempting. Very, very tempting. I don't know what to do. Go back to the bookstore. Maybe. Oh! There's a cat. Right there. Can't see her. She's in the top right corner. Let's see. Yeah. Who might be on that we can raid? Oh. I see Hart Griffin is on. And looks like the only reader I see on speaking English. So yeah, let's... No, Don Quixote. So yeah, let's raid Hart Griffin. Just have to get to the right window so I can do this. Oh, wrong window. This window. So, raid message. Let's listen to some wonderful reading of Don Quixote. And I'll see you all hopefully tomorrow for some fairy tales. Have a good night.
In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems.